Welcome, everybody. I'm Bill Brenner from Cyber Risk Alliance, and I'm pleased to be here for today's Cybercast, sponsored by Oligo Security. We're going to talk about implementing a practical AppSec program, expert insights on strategy and execution. And my guests from Oligo are Naor Penso, Head of Product Security, Dustin Lehr, Senior Director of Platform Security, and McCully, Director of Sales Engineering. Before I turn it over to this ensemble, just a few housekeeping notes. If you have any questions during this presentation, you can ask via the Q&A box. So you'll see 5 buttons below our video here. The Q&A is second to left, and also second to the right is the handouts button, and we have some handouts in there for you. So if you go in there, you should be able to access those. And so without further ado, gentlemen, welcome.
Awesome. Thank you. Excited for this session today. So welcome, everyone. I'm McCully. I am the Director of Solutions Engineering at Oligo. I'm going to get us started by setting a little background for the conversation. And then what I would love to do is to bring in a couple of the panelists, a couple of experts, and start some conversations, solicit some opinions and insight. I love these types of conversations. And so hopefully we've got a few good discussion points. I think that'll be very interactive. And as Bill had mentioned, love our audience participation. So if there's something that is intriguing to you or interesting, or we hit on something that's you want to delve into further, definitely fire those questions away. So I'm going to spend the next couple of minutes just level setting of what we're here to talk about. And then, as I said, we'll jump right into that. As you can imagine, and I don't think this is, for a lot of you, probably new information, but when we start talking about application and practical application security, one of the things that I think drives a lot of these conversations is the fact that applications themselves have increased in complexity, right? As we've seen sort of the evolution associated with application creation, the amount of applications that are actually present in the world. Every organization nowadays seems to have some sort of presence with applications. I talk to a lot of organizations, anything from large retail to fast food chains that have some sort of a presence from an application perspective. So we see a lot of organizations moving there. When you layer into this moving to the cloud, right, and start putting in a lot of the operational efficiencies that organizations are starting to take advantage of, I think it also adds or introduces additional layers of complexity, right? When you look at the cloud, when you look at infrastructure as code, the adoption of containers, and even with engineering teams using open source software more and more and more, like all of these start to contribute to the level of complexity. And then the most the newest member to this layer of complexity is also AI. We're seeing more adoption of AI generated code, which again starts to introduce even additional layers associated with it. One of the things that I've seen throughout my career, we'll leverage some of these talk tracks as part of this panel discussion too, is there's kind of 2 basic camps that I think you can put security approaches into. And that is more of a proactive approach, right? Getting ahead of the issues, trying to discover, find, address issues as early as possible, and more of a reactive. They both have pros and cons, right? And I'm probably nobody here is going to tell you do one versus the other, but there's definitely advantages and disadvantages to both sides of these that I think that we wanted to discuss and talk today. So proactive being, you can find issues, you can address them before they become security incidents, right? Getting ahead of the game. And it also helps to promote security awareness through entire organizations. One of the things, though, I think that is pretty obvious that we've seen in these proactive approaches is a lot of the solutions are you have to use sort of theoretical approaches in order to identify those types of issues, which come with its own side sort of effects of potentially a lot of false positives and putting extra burdens on individuals. On the other side, more of a reactive approach. And interesting enough, throughout my career, I've kind of straddled both sides. And so I've seen sort of the discussion points for both is the ability to have a runtime, a real time of let's only identify issues and tackle them as they surface, right? It helps to have sort of a very focused effort. You're only spending your time on things that are actually most important and critical. However, that also means you are reactive, right? You're actually reacting to fires as they start. Incidents will happen, right? You're going to have to be prepared to actually assess the damage and address it in real time. So both of these, right, have advantages, but they also have sort of disadvantages. And we'll talk about those and how we can integrate those into an effective application security program. As we look at application security programs, and I think this is also one of the other things that is very insightful for me, in the fact that vulnerability management has become a very large market, right? We're seeing a substantial growth in this area. And I think it's for multiple reasons. As we talked about sort of the complexities associated with applications, the amount of extra components that are part of modern day applications, it also starts to bring in additional layers of vulnerabilities associated with those, and then layers of complexities of staying on top of those vulnerabilities. And so with this expansion, I think what we're seeing is there's a lot of many different sort of approaches to helping organizations understand where to focus their efforts. We see aggregation of those vulnerabilities, deduplication, prioritization. Where do you focus in order to actually address the most risk, right? And so these solutions are evolving in order to help a lot of organizations focus on those efforts. So it's one of the struggles, obviously, with the market sort of creating these solutions. It means there's pain points associated with them. And one of the things that I want to talk about with the group here today is specifically that. Fundamentally, they're all trying to address like what actually matters most. Where can we spend our time and focus in solving these problems? I think a big component, and again, we'll spend a little time talking about this today, that has definitely contributed to this that we've seen is open source. There's open source scattered throughout every modern application. Open source not only in the code that's created, but within the containers and operating systems and many aspects associated with the applications themselves. There's tremendous amount of efficiencies that are gained from using and consuming these and building them into the applications. But at the same point in time, it's code that you don't have control over. There's outside dependencies associated with it. And if we look at some of the statistics, just even in 2023, this year alone, there's been over 50,000 CVEs that have been created, which means organizations are constantly having to stay on top of these, understand where their risk is, understand if they're exposed, and then put remediation strategies in place in order to actually address those. So that framework, right? All of these sort of layers that I think contribute to the application security and trying to stay on top of these is some of the topics that I wanted to spend a little bit of time discussing today, and have some opinions and approaches that have worked, some that haven't, and share those with the audience. So with that, without further ado, I'd like to have both Naor as well as Dustin maybe do a quick introduction, and then we'll fire away into some of these discussion points. I think we'll keep it fairly lively. I'm going to start with a couple of questions, just asking opinions, and then I think we'll delve into some specific areas that I want to extract more sort of conversation ideas, thoughts associated with that. So Dustin, I'll have you fire away, and then we'll jump into the conversation.
Yeah, sounds great. Happy to be here, by the way. This is going to be a great discussion. Looking forward to it. So my background is in software engineering. I was a software engineer myself for 13 years in a variety of industries, video games, actually, Department of Defense, retail, and so on. Currently, I am the head of platform security for Fivetran. Platform security, as we define it in our company, is a combination of cloud plus AppSec. And it's really focused on the product, securing the product at the end of the day. The reason we combine these two different domains, related domains, but traditionally different, is because of a lot of points that you were making, Mick, a minute ago. And that's complexity, but also what we're observing as a merging between infrastructure and code and software. At the end of the day, you've got software as infrastructure, or infrastructure as software, kind of shifting toward that. And I think the developer mindset is also moving more toward thinking about infrastructure while writing the code of the applications. So it doesn't make a lot of sense to us anymore to treat those as two different things. I think that they merge together pretty well. So that's the way that we've structured our team at Fivetran. And looking forward to the conversation.
Awesome. Naor?
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. My name is Naor Penso. I'm the Vice President of Product Security for FICO. I've been with FICO for the past 4-ish years. And essentially, the way that product security is for FICO is pretty much everything you can think of, from the point someone has an idea for a new product, for a new offering, for a new solution, through the entire life cycle of product management, architecture, engineering, and then also everything that comes afterwards, which is how we build and how we deliver and how we support our clients, and truly sort of an end-to-end viewpoint of what we deliver, what we build, through to how our clients are using it. I agree. I'm looking forward for this discussion. I actually, I saw a teaser into what we're about to talk about, and I'm very excited. I will say, product security for FICO, I think, is a bit expansive in terms of the areas of coverage, and we are coming down to about 50 people nowadays. And the way that we have structured our organization, which I think we might touch on a little bit, is by the clients and customers that we are serving. Meaning, within product security, we have the group that is responsible for ensuring that our developers' experience is secure and sound, as well as a group that is responsible for ensuring that our client experience is secure and sound. So a lot to talk about those sort of things, and how the handover is so instrumental, and why it makes sense to be a part of product security to ensure that it's not your traditional, hey, I finished building something, here is, an installable or deployable artifact. Now you go and you do whatever you do for the IT organization or for the ops organizations, and actually ensuring that we have a very good modern approach to tackling, security problems as they emerge, whether they emerged when someone wrote the first line of code, or whether they emerged when they are actually happening in production. We're seeing them.
Excellent. Great. I appreciate both of you taking the time and being here today. So as I mentioned, I think I want to start out with just a couple of quick questions to kind of set the framework. And actually, I think both of you answered a little bit of these, but I want to see if there's anything else you wanted to elaborate on, which is first just getting your opinion on any sort of significant changes that you've seen recently in application security. So Dustin, I think you started to mention this already, right? Which is one of those that I believe is that transition of the platform over to the development teams. But is there anything else that you wanted to call out that you've seen recently from a transition perspective on changes within your organization, as far as just from an application security perspective?
Yeah, and I think Fivetran kind of started this way, but I think the focus on DevOps or DevSecOps, if you want to say it, although security's always been part of DevOps, in my view. I think that, developers or even ops folks are learning way more about the other side. It's a kind of a diverse set of knowledge that we've been asked to have our developers have. It's not this sort of siloed approach. It's not, hey, you write some code. I mean, even to the point of understanding systems more end to end, I think developers have to be more versatile in terms of the skill sets that they have. It's not just front end engineer is focused on this. They don't know anything about the release process or anything about the infrastructure that it runs on, which I think is the older way. Nowadays, they do have to be concerned with those types of things, especially if they're involved in sort of the design of the system, right? And that's where you see a lot of blending of, maybe part of your architecture, part of your solution is built upon cloud native features or offerings, right? So it's sort of part of your software now that you just account for the infrastructure side. And I think security comes into play as well, because that's one of those additional things that has to be on people's minds when they set up and design systems. And I think that's created an opportunity for AppSec, frankly, or security people to have a seat at the table. I think traditionally we've talked about kind of perimeter security and how to protect people from themselves. I think it's more of a conversation in terms of how do we merge the right security habits into the processes as we build software, not as an afterthought to come later. So I think that's one of the biggest changes that I think we've seen over the last 3 to 5 years.
Got it. Naor, anything you wanted to add there? I know you actually mentioned too, like your interaction with development and development teams. So it sounds like at FICO, you've done something very similar, or I'm curious as far as how those changes have evolved over the last few years and what you've seen from an application security perspective.
Yeah, no, of course. I wholeheartedly agree with Dustin's points. I mean, my view on it is traditionally, and I've been doing security long enough to know that, is we have, as security practitioners, we've worked very hard not to understand what the business is doing and how things are built. We're more aligned to IT and how things are running and how we're seeing whatever is running than trying to actually understand what is built and what are the business needs and how we're supporting it. And I think that one of the biggest changes that happened to product security and security in general is the understanding that we can't continue to sustain like that, mainly because the industry itself has transformed from waterfall development where engineers don't care about what happens after they deliver something. It's like, I delivered my code, I don't care. Like, however it's running, it's up, it's down, I don't mind, right? To more, you build it, you own it, you run it, and there is full ownership and accountability on the engineering teams, and they recognize that, at some point in time, if there is a call late at night on a Sunday, then they will need to respond to it in some organizations, which really pushes security to have the same mindset or the same shift, not just in terms of how we are scanning the code, but actually into how we're ensuring that the security mindset that we're putting in is directly bound to how we're building our software. And I think that is the biggest and most profound change that probably happened because otherwise, AppSec would have remained sort of, I don't know, let's put another web application firewall. Let's see, I need something here, I need something there, some more controls. And yeah, so to Dustin, I agree with Dustin. I think that's the more profound change and really the ability today in a modern environment to understand the context and how software is built is also super critical. Like 10 years ago, if you wanted to understand how software work, you either need to go and speak with the engineering team and hope that they understand how their software work, which is not obvious. Or you actually needed to go and write the code or read the code. And today you have deployment manifests and you have API specs and you have so many data points and entry points that you can learn into how things are operating and how things are actually running. That makes the security lives much easier to tailor the security needs and requirements into whatever the business or the engineering group is actually building.
Awesome. I think what I got out of both of those is more of a conversation associated with integration of security into not only the business, but aspects of sort of components of the business, as well as, Dustin, I think you touched on this as well, as even like going the other way, like development being more integrated into the entire process and understanding the entire application and the business impacts of those. So with that in mind, I want to try to take the opposite approach and say, okay, with these changes that you've seen and sort of this evolution of being intertwined more in the business, understanding the impact of the business, understanding sort of these holistic aspects of the entire process, what's involved. What have you seen, or what's actually reared its ugly head, if you will, as far as like what's causing the most friction, what's causing the most pain? Where are you spending the majority of your time trying to solve problems in order to actually, because it sounds like both of you are very much focused on how do I deliver that to the business? How do I impact the business and help solve these problems? So where have you seen sort of the most restriction, I guess, as far as helping to deliver those types of things? So Naor, if you've got something that comes to mind, any like as far as where you've seen some of those friction points.
Yeah, of course. So when we look into, again, sort of traditionally how software would have been built in a waterfall manner, the security involvement would usually be at the end, and it would have been a painful process, like a month or two to get a security sign-off. However, it was very clear what you are delivering, when you're delivering it, and sort of what is the artifact that is about to be sent out. And that was very painful, but it was very known. I think that today the challenge is there are a lot of opportunities, but also challenges when we're moving into more GitOps, sort of you can release 50, 100, or 200 times a day. You really need to start breaking down security and how you're doing it to very, very small snippets. And that means a lot of injection of security capabilities and tooling very early on, essentially that shift left buzzword that we are always talking about. But as that is happening more and more, what we're seeing is the usage of open source rises, and then choosing the right open source package becomes a problem. Or the ability to maintain and operate things when you are always on the hook for delivering new feature set becomes challenging. Like, what am I about to do now? Am I am I maintaining my code, or am I refactoring it, or am I investing time in building new feature set? And I think that with that, suddenly, like, again, in the past we had 2-3 security tools in our tool belt. Today we have 10, maybe, depending on the size, depending on the type. More tools means more findings, more defects. More defects means more headache to review, resolve. And definitely a lot of them have some level of overlapping. Some of them have a lot of overlapping, some less. But really the ability to drive a very conscientious response to the developers and saying, this is what you need to be working on, has become a very, very big challenge that in my mind existed in the past, but was less critical than it is today. So,
got it.
Yeah, I think what I would add to that, which really just expands on what you were saying, is, I think it goes beyond just compliance, like here are 5 criticals, 30 highs, you just need to fix them, more toward realizing that, our engineers take their job seriously. They have a code base that they've built that they're proud of, and you should be very sure of yourself before you call their babies ugly. Okay, so that all is to say, I think the focus really needs to, and really a lot of the tension points are you providing results that are relevant to them? Like, can you explain why this is an issue? Can you explain how an attacker might exploit this piece of code that this developer is very proud of, which I think will, if done right, cause them to be more aware of the actual security implications of the code that they're writing, beyond just, I don't know, there's a scan tool and it told me that this is an issue, so we just need to fix it. Like, to me, that's not good enough. And especially as a developer, I can tell you that's not good enough. And I'm not seeing that we've solved this yet. I do see, vendors, tools, and such popping up that I think are starting to focus on this. But I don't think we're there yet. I think we are still in a place that we're struggling with relevance of results and reachability and that sort of stuff. And I do think that that's causing significant pain for us.
Got it. Interesting. I heard a couple of things there. So Naor, you mentioned like the highly, and I know we discussed this at the beginning, right, was the highly transactional aspect of these, but then also the adoption of the open source. And then both of you touched on sort of relevancy of those results. So, I've seen something very similar. So I don't think you're alone in that environment. I definitely know it's a challenge. So I want to kind of throw a curveball in here, if you guys are open to that. And I know we sort of discussed this, and I think it aligns with what we've just been talking about, some of these different areas and different approaches to solving these problems. And one of the things that I started with was this idea of sort of 2 different camps, of like a proactive security, a reactive security. And I know both of you have also mentioned sort of the marketing terms associated with like how to kind of put these into their different buckets and categories. The shift left approach of taking sort of the security concepts and delivering them as proactive as possible into sort of the design and creation process. And then there's more of a shift right, if you will, of taking it to kind of the other extreme. And I know I mentioned this to you before, but I'm going to kind of randomly pick you. And the idea here is your company, your boss, right, just came to you and said, all right, I'm done with this, right? Philosophical approach, the marketing associated with it, we're not spending any more money. I need you to implement. And Dustin, I'm gonna kind of pick on you for the shift right approach, saying, all right, everything we're doing now, 100% shift right. We don't want to spend any more resources. It's cost us too much time. We're done with that. Like, I want you to kind of sort of tell me how you would defend that. And then after you're sort of defending it and telling me why it's the best approach, then say what you're going to miss. And then Naor, I want to take the opposite approach to you. I want to say, all right, your boss has come and said, all right, I am so tired of being reactive. We're always behind. We need to move everything in our entire organization to a shift left. I want to be proactive on everything. Let's give up sort of that approach. And I want just to have this as a discussion point, because what I've found is I think when you start to poke these buttons and these bears, you start to derive like, all right, well, what is the real pain? What are we trying to solve? So Dustin, I'm gonna start with you. So you've just been told, here's your mandate, right? Like where are you gonna be like, all right, I'm all in, this is gonna work, and where are you gonna be kicking and screaming saying, nah, I don't think so. I have to sacrifice these 5 things.
Yeah, I'm appreciating that you gave me this side, because I typically walk into new environments and I do like to focus more on the right side, at least initially. And I can kind of go into why, but I think, the way that I would defend the right side is, especially in a situation that you don't have right side controls in place, you don't even know if you have a problem otherwise. Okay. Do you even have any issues in your production environment? How do you know that without a focus on the right side, meaning specifically to measure what has escaped through your process into prod today? What does your prod environment look like in terms of vulnerabilities? Do a pen test, make sure that, or basically try to verify or validate whether or not you have an issue currently in prod, and then set up controls to ensure that you're able to respond to anything that you can, that you do find, in a way that you can remediate or even just mitigate the issue as quickly as possible. It's the fight fires approach. It's the reactive approach, kind of like you were saying. And I think you need to start there, because frankly, I think if you don't have a lot of that stuff in place, you don't know if you have an issue, first of all. So why do we need to have training? Why do we need to have design reviews? Why do we need to have some of these left side things if we don't have an issue to begin with? And I think to a large extent, if you measure yourself in prod and you do end up finding issues, that justifies, some of the left side approaches. Without the right side to point out your escape rate for the vulns and risks in prod, there's really shouldn't be anything that you pursue on the left side at all. And again, going back to this idea of like, in a perfect world, literally, if you had no issues in prod, what exactly would your left side approaches be trying to fix?
Got it. All right. I can take that. So your defense is more of, you got to know where you're starting from. And that should always be sort of the framework. All right, cool. I'm going to come back and we'll talk about sort of what you sacrifice. But Naor, like love your opinion. All right. Your boss just said, here's what you're rolling with. You don't have a choice in the world. So what are you happy with? And what do you think that you're going to be lacking when that mandate makes its way down? And hopefully your boss doesn't.
Yeah. In my defense, I'll start by saying, in my defense, I'll start by saying I agree with Dustin.
Yeah.
and I think it is a portion, right? But I will, for the sake of the debate, I will definitely defend the left side of things. So I mean, the first thing we need to remember is that defects are like snowballs. When they emerge the first time, they are usually easier to fix. Let's say you have an open source package at a certain version, and that package has defects associated with it. If you don't fix it at that time, new versions will emerge, and suddenly the jump to newer versions become much, much harder. Like now it is not a small, hey, let's fix that, let's do some minor change. It's actually, I need to run entire regression testing on everything because it is such a major change and the software changed, etc. So really defects are like snowballs. The earlier you tackle with them, the easier they are to fix, rather than learning about them very well, like downstream at the end, where they are suddenly becoming very big things to solve. And the second thing is that I think that, to Dustin's point, you need to know what's running in production and how it's running. But I will make the counterpoint of, if you don't know how the software is designed to operate, which is something you learned on the left, then the insights you get on the right they can be problematic or not, or at least to the very least incomplete. And a case in point, there might be a use case where there is an open S3 bucket. Let's take that very useful case, because there are a lot of incidents in the world around how there was an open S3 bucket and a lot of data leaked, right? And if you're only looking at the right, you might think, oh my God, there is an open S3 bucket. That shouldn't happen. It's crazy. Now all bells and whistles are out, right? The forensics team was done the work. And then if you would have only asked the engineer, he would have told you that those are just assets they need to load for the website, and it's completely fine that it's open to the internet. Like that's by design what it should have been doing. And that is something you learn through observation of the left side, rather than just seeing the outcome of it, which is an open S3 bucket on the right side. And last but not least, there are things, and generally maybe not as much as code fixes, but there are things that if you don't fix on the left, being able to fix them on the right, being able to fix them after they're already in production or sort of reach the right side of things, they're becoming almost impossible. Think about architectural design issues. Think about decisions that architects have made, and then they started working through them, and now they've developed code on it, and now you're seeing it on the right. Your ability to really react to those things can mean completely refactoring everything that they've done, which comes down to truly being a very large set of wasteful work, as well as potentially, sort of a domino effect where things starts to break. So really shifting left everything is, if any, it's a great mean to learn and understand and react to things, or proactively react to things that are happening very early, so that the change of the ship can be made easier, and it can be made to adjust to more security-minded approaches. And last but not least, as a company that serves a lot of financial institutions and a lot of organizations, there are a lot of demands that our clients are expecting of us when it comes to lifecycle management for vulnerabilities, and how they're, what are the SLAs and how they're being met, etc. And for many of them, and being a person that meets clients every week, for many of them, if we got to the point that it's already in production, it's too late. In their mind, there should be a gating function before it reaches production, right? That actually demonstrates that it's running in compliance with everything we are doing. So if we are only looking at the right, we might actually miss some compliance demands as well as client expectations, because in their mind, you have failed in delivering secure software. You have already delivered unsecure software, and now you're just reacting to the fact it's unsecure on the right side of things.
Got it. Being behind the eight ball. That makes sense, because I heard a couple of themes there. One was, which was an interesting one actually to me, the technical debt sort of idea and approach of falling sort of behind. And then the other one, which was an interesting point, which almost was a business contextual awareness of the purpose of the application in the beginning. which both of those are sort of intriguing aspects. So along those lines, and we won't spend probably a ton of more time on this, but I like the idea in the conversation because you're actually hitting on a couple of things that I think are even new to me. And I know we talked about sort of that refactoring design implication, bad decisions of not having sort of ideas earlier before. Dustin, outside of what Naor just mentioned, what if you were pushed to that right side, what would you go kicking and screaming about that you're lacking? If there's anything outside of what Naor just mentioned that you wouldn't be willing to sacrifice.
Yeah, I think we touched on a lot of this, but I think true root cause, addressing the actual iceberg underneath, right, is way more efficient than just running around and fixing all of the symptoms of an issue, frankly.
Yes.
You know, I've got like two images in my mind. I've got this old cartoon where Donald Duck is trying to plug the holes of a dam with his fingers, right? Yeah. And he's like there's leaks coming out and he's trying to plug the holes, and it just seems like this battle he's not going to win. I think if you just focus on the right side, it looks a lot like that, frankly. You're running around trying to plug holes without actually addressing the root cause of those issues. And you're going to end up spending a lot more time and money, in my mind, taking that approach than stepping back, fixing whatever architectural issue is leading to these symptoms at the end of the day. And, you know, I think this was mentioned before. I think it's a lot cheaper to take that approach. And if you have that approach up front and you have a more left side, you know, visibility into your system, you can better understand what those root causes are and ultimately make better decisions in terms of the right way to fix those issues. So that's the hill I would die on in terms of advocating for the left side.
Got it. And Naor, anything else on sort of the right side that you would say, all right, I just like, this is, I'm not willing to give up these sort of components because of blank.
Yeah, I think Dustin touched on it in his points. At the end of the day, you know, issues will happen, problems will emerge. We can't avoid them. Yep. You know, it's a never-ending battle, right? And sometimes even for the mere fact of, you know, there is now Log4j, right? There is a new sort of CVE everyone are jumping around on. You cannot count on the efficiency of your engineering teams, and it doesn't matter how efficient they are, right, to be able to fix it within a couple of hours and have everything running in production. I don't know a lot of organizations that are able to do that at that level, right? You must be able to rely on controls and abilities that are at runtime that actually help you plug sort of the hole in the wall until someone comes with mortar and actually being able to sort of really seal it the way that it should be. So I think that it's always a mixture of the two. But definitely there are a lot of cases where, you know, controls and abilities to protect and understand, you know, the behavior of the runtime environment are significantly very important for us. Again, an example from real life, sometimes there are findings where the engineering team is acknowledging, but it will take them X amount of time to fix it, and they still want to release. And the ability to come and say, hey, we have a web application firewall, it's active, we can build a custom rule for it, and we'll actually fix it for you for X amount of time until you fix it. It's a very big business value proposition that we're providing to the business, because we're actually helping them accelerate their delivery rather than just blocking them and saying you are not doing the right things. So I think that can also be looked at as a plus. And last but not least, I think that there is a lot of things that are, and Dustin touched on it, that are highly contextual. There are, you know, you can have a million defects on the left side of things, and then only 5% or 1% of them can be applicable on the right side because of the way that the software is instrumented and because of the way that it's communicated with and it's running. And all of those sort of things are things that you might be able to learn some of the manifests and some of the things, but in general, you really need to understand the right side logic in order to apply it left. And I think that is a very, again, case in point, there are use cases where you have microservices that are running once a year for 5 minutes, and they only do a batch job, and they don't have any network communication to them. So even if they are vulnerable, some might argue it's not relevant because you can highly lock them down for those 5 minutes once a year, and that would be sufficient. So why invest a lot of time in trying to fix, invest engineering cycle on fixing it? And I think that context is something that must come from the right and sort of help make decisions on the left side of things.
Yeah, that makes sense. I like both of those sort of discussions and arguments. So Dustin, the root cause sort of remediation conversation, like that, it makes sense. And Naor, you actually reminded me of, it's funny, I like sharing this story, at the same time I don't, because it's pseudo embarrassing, knowing when I started my security career 25, 30 years ago, whenever it was, and I'm dating myself a little bit. I slipped up in front of a security individual and actually said the term, and I don't need either of you laughing at this, but 100% secure, right? Which is not something you say in security ever. And I got made aware of that very, very quickly in front of a few people. But that idea of doesn't matter how proactive you are, you can't always account for everything. And because of those cases, you need to be prepared in order those situations where you can account for everything, in order to actually have some sort of approach associated with it. And then the last thing I heard, which I completely agree, is sort of the contextual aspect, which was interesting because you leverage sort of the contextual aspect when you were talking about the left side too, right? Of actually understanding the context of the purpose of the application, but then understanding the context of how the application is actually executed and run, and sort of the implications to the business associated with it. And then one of the last things, and I think both of you actually touched on this, and this is one I wanted to delve into, because it was one that both of you mentioned as far as like the points in some of the conversation, which is relevancy of results. I want to spend just a little bit of time, honing in and hammering on, and then we have time for probably one or more, two questions, and then we'll see if there's any questions from the audience. But relevancy of results, because this is a tricky one, both from many sort of elements. One of the last things, Naor, you just mentioned, which was, should I care, right? There's, we talked about this early on, that there's organizations are struggling with hundreds, if not thousands, of just security risks, potential risks that are being surfaced to them constantly. And so the challenge is trying to figure out, to both of your points, is like, where do you focus your efforts? What is sort of the best approach of understanding which ones are going to have the biggest impact, which ones are real risks, and then based upon those real risks, which ones do you actually focus your efforts on? And I know there's a few approaches in the market, but I'm just curious if either of you have gone down the path of trying to solve this problem, and what you've seen has been most effective. And again, biased, and we'll talk about this in a little bit from an Oligo perspective on where we think we can help with this. But I'm curious as far as what either of you have utilized or tried to utilize, or some of the approaches that you're currently using, or if this is still something that you're struggling with inside of your organizations, as far as like what is sort of that best approach. Now, if you want to fire away, if you've got some ideas or insight that you want to share.
Yeah, of course. The way that we approach that, and that's the way we are trying to be practical about it. We make a distinction between newly introduced code and existing code. In our mind, they are not the same, because if I have a developer working right now on some new feature and some new piece of code, and he has defects, honestly, I don't really need the context. He's working on it as we speak. He's well aware of what he's building. It should be very fast forward for him to actually fix those things and just move forward. Right, so it's when it's contextualized to the developer, and sorry, I'm using the word context in many ways, but in this case, right, when the finding and the defect is contextualized to the developer, right, and he knows, like, here is the code that I wrote, and here is where the problem is, I expect him to fix it. It doesn't matter if it's critical or high or low or whatnot, because it is truly right now apparent in front of him as he's working through the code. Then we have, developers doing the pull requests and code merges into main, and now that becomes maintainable code, but not new code. And I think that that's where most of the problems emerge, because there you actually need to be much more you need to be more considerate of what actually needs to be fixed at what cadence and what priority, and what is the impact that it might have on production environments, etc. So, they essentially the case where packages just become old, right? Like, we really want all of our engineering teams to use greenkeeping and always water the lawn and everything will be green and lush, but for the most part, they don't necessarily go and upgrade packages unless they have vulnerabilities in them. And I think that's sort of one of the challenges, because then we're getting to a point that it's not something that someone is actively working on, where I can come and say, hey, Mick, you're now writing that code. Let's go ahead and fix it. I need to come out of cycle and ensure that this is being thought of as a part of the sprint planning, as a part of the planning for the development, so people can actually go and fix that. That's where we need to be considerate to the fact that, I heard it from one of our engineering teams. I was able to prove that it wasn't the case, but the feeling is there nonetheless, that they're investing 70% of their time in doing security. And if they have that feeling, even if it's not true and it's not accurate, the fact that they are feeling like that means that we need to do something different. And truly, our ability to invest time in contextualizing and understanding what would be the true impact of a defect, and being able to come and say, that is much more foundational, because this capability or sort of this microservice will be exposed to clients and to the internet, or this one is buried in the backend, or we know that this is not applicable because of XYZ means and reasons, then that will be immensely instrumental to allow our engineers to not feel like they're investing 70% of their time doing security, right? And actually doing security the right way. So I don't know if that makes sense, but I would say that's at least how we approach defect lifecycle management. Of course, it comes down to how you reconcile and dedupe and then see what makes the most sense. But at the end of the day, it comes down to, how am I, and Dustin said it right the first time, how am I telling the engineer, you need to fix that, and I feel comfortable enough that actually needs to be fixed, and I can stand behind that statement and show him why it needs to be fixed, right? Because engineers don't like to be told what to do. They want to understand why. They're entitled to understand why, and we need to be able to explain why.
Yeah, I like that. There were a couple things that you just mentioned that I think it's interesting that you separate out. And actually, this is I like that you're sharing it, because this has been one of my philosophies associated with some of these better approaches, which is when you're early in that decision process and the ability to actually deviate and make those changes is there, take advantage of it. But in those circumstances where you're post that point, this is where I'm hearing like that level of confidence of knowing and giving the results, and like respectfully sharing the justification of the why of, I'm asking you to invest this effort. Here is the reason why I'm actually doing that, and having sort of those conversations. Dustin, anything outside of that, or anything that you've seen successful as far as maybe even solving that problem, right? Because it's not a trivial one in order to actually solve.
Yeah, it's a good approach, I think, in general, for a couple of reasons. I think that new issues are fresh on the developer's mind, and there's momentum behind the change. So it's easy to justify, hey, just take a second, go back, rework this one part, while it's, again, fresh on their minds, as opposed to pointing out some obscure issue in a piece of code that no one's looked at for 5 years. I think you're going to have a much tougher time getting across the resistance hump when it comes to that. I do think, though, that there is context in terms of what they're building. Even if it's a new piece of code, it's possible that, the service or the asset that they're coding against doesn't necessarily warrant a fix to the particular issue that comes up just because it's new. I don't think is good enough. And I'm sure you account for this, Naor, as well. Because I do think context of the service matters, and debt in some cases is okay. Maybe this is some prototype that they're trying to get out the door quickly or something like that. So therefore, and it's a low risk thing. It's not public facing yet. It's internally used, whatever the context is, which is why I do want to bring up the importance in my mind of your asset inventory, and most specifically calculating your risk to the business level for each of those assets, business criticality, and then other contextual things like, is this public facing, right? I think you should have a strong understanding of that for the services and assets in your environment so that you can prioritize properly. You know, a critical issue in a high risk service that's public facing, that's business critical, is a lot different than a critical issue in a, you know, low risk service that's internally used that, you know, people, hardly anyone uses, right? And there's a major difference between the two. And I think understanding your environment to that level helps you make more informed decisions when it comes to vulnerabilities, and also where you spend your time. Frankly, what are you going to threat model first?
Yeah.
Right. So I've spent a lot of time actually in my career trying to build out and frankly help vendors build out solutions for us that shortcut a lot of this asset inventory stuff that I think is possible to solve. We just haven't gotten there yet. You know, I think there's a lot of AI auto detection stuff that we can do to understand our environment better that we haven't fully realized.
Yep. Awesome. Those are all great points, I guess. And gentlemen, I appreciate sort of this conversation. I'm going to spend just the next couple of minutes talking a little bit about, from Oligo's perspective, like how we like to help or believe we can solve at least some of these problems. And then we'll open it up for questions and see if there's any other outstanding issues that we want to cover through the environment. So with that said, I'm going to spend just a couple of minutes giving you a quick introduction to Oligo. This practical application security is definitely near and dear to our heart. A lot of these topics we just discussed, and the terms like Dustin Lehr, the idea of contextual awareness, understanding sort of the relevancy, sharing with confidence, sort of some of those components of these risks, especially, Naor, you mentioned like separating out new sort of decisions and processes with things that are already there. And I think with, you know, even with just the numbers of CVEs that we talked about that have been disclosed this year, you're very often caught in sort of that secondary set of reactionary sort of positions, and having sort of the understanding of what is that real risk. This is one of the focuses that we have taken at Oligo to say we want to help organizations solve that problem as much as possible. And one of the things that we do, and again, happy to share, we'll talk just a little bit about this, but anybody that wants more information, we can definitely get into a lot of detail associated with it in one-on-one conversations. But our approach is to say we want to bridge that gap. We used the terms and talked a little bit about shift left, shift right. We kind of believe in this idea of extending both areas as much as possible. And one of the things that we do at Oligo is to actually try to provide a lot of this contextual understanding of what are some of these real risks? How do I actually look at all of this list of vulnerabilities across my organization and understand what's actually truly exploitable? And it's one of the things that we want to surface. We want to surface that back to the security team, but we also want to give it to developers. I think there's this aspect of evidence and proof. And one of the things that we just talked about significantly is sort of that respect of telling them why, that we believe is sort of foundational, basically establishing a communication mechanism to say, hey, we saw this in the code. There's a vulnerability associated with it. We know it's executed in production, which means there's a path an attacker can have. And then Dustin, you just hit on some of these last points associated with layer in some of those additional contextual elements of understanding business criticality. Is there sensitive information behind it? Because those on top of actually understanding if it's something that can truly be exploited, give you a sense of understanding which ones are high severity risks and which ones should be remediated first. So this is near and dear to our hearts. One of the things that we believe that we help organizations solve. It's something where we add in additional layer of visibility of helping you understand all of the risks inside your organization, but then understanding which one of those are truly exploitable, surfacing those back to you so that you can consume them yourself, as well as share them with your development team. One of the other things that I know we also truly believe, and we touched on this before, there's this idea of being far left and far right. And as we mentioned earlier, there's no such thing as 100% secure. So you still have to account for those situations where you're going to be caught on your heels. So be proactive as possible, provide sort of that guidance on solving the problem and making sure you're focusing on relevant results so that you're only investing time of developers to fix things when it has an impact to your security posture. But the other piece is actually having a plan in place and when you run into those situations where there might be a brand new type of exploit, a new vulnerability that was just disclosed, and the ability to actually protect yourself in those environments associated with it. So we've developed a couple of technologies at Oligo that we think align very closely with this. Happy to share details with anybody at any particular point, but I think it aligns a lot with the strategies that we just talked about. So I know we got 5 minutes left, Bill. If there's any questions out there, would love to like maybe tackle them or fire away and wrap up sort of our conversation here.
So one question I had is whether Oligo can serve as a complete replacement for traditional SCA tools.
That's an interesting one. So loaded question in some cases. So there is an aspect of one of the things that we do is help organizations understand these risks and our ability to assess all of sort of the open source, whether it is in applications you created, applications you purchased, applications that you're leveraging from somebody else. And so there's an aspect of being able to understand sort of that entire risk posture, but then give you that exploitability. I would say it's both. We can, in some cases, work for organizations where we've done that. And other large organizations, and Naor sort of, and Dustin mentioned this before, there's still an aspect of the more you can get ahead of it and the proactive sort of decision process and given that guidance when things are created, it becomes very complementary. So it depends upon exactly what the strategy is, but potentially I like the question. It's not always easy to answer in every single circumstance, sort of without having sort of the context associated with the solution that's attempted to be solved.
Does Oligo utilize CVSS and EPSS metrics in its process of prioritization, especially in terms of reachability and exploitability?
Yeah, that's another question. Dustin Lehr could probably chime in on this, that there is an aspect of, with anything that you discover, right? There's the ability to try to understand and assess the relevancy. Is it a real risk to the organization? Understand contextual impact, right? What's behind any of those things and what's the risk to our organization with having that present? And then the last piece is to actually say, well, how do we prioritize that? And what is sort of the elements that actually add into sort of that prioritization? And a lot of those start to fall into the categories of what you just asked, which is like layering on those additional prioritization elements account for things like CVSS scores, EPSS scores, right? The ability to actually understand sort of the criticality, which in those cases, you can actually layer in some of those contextual elements if you have them. If not, you kind of take them at face value on top of some of the other aspects that you have. From an Oligo perspective, absolutely. Naor or Dustin, any additional sort of insight as far as how you leverage those types of scoring mechanisms for prioritization?
Yeah, I would just say typically.
Oh,
sorry, just a quick comment that typically the scores provided by tools are incomplete. I would just want to make that clear. They lack context in a lot of cases. So I've worked on methods to essentially adjust severities based on the originally provided severity score by the tool.
Yep. The contextual aspect, I completely agree.
Yeah, I would just add on top of that as a B2B company, our clients expect us to use CVSS score because that's the market standard for it, with the understanding that it's lacking at least at the base score, and really what we will be looking to do and what we're always looking when we're speaking with our partners on that specific problem is we need you to be able to explain the context that you're about to drive with all of that context into a new CVSS score or a new EPSS score, because my client expects me to come and say, this is the score, and that's the reasoning behind why this is the score. And so definitely I don't see us moving away from those scores anytime in the next, I don't know how many years, but we definitely need to harness them to, and probably append more information to them to provide more context to ourselves and to our client, in our case, to our clients as well.
Yep. I think you both are spot on. Dustin, and like what you just mentioned is sort of adding that additional contextual element, but Naor, like the ability to have sort of ubiquitous communication mechanism, I think is something that is what the industry is looking for as well. So the combination of those. So I know we're right up against the time. Bill, I'll hand it over to you. And I want to say thank you, Dustin and Naor, for this conversation. This is like, I love having these and getting sort of different perspectives. And I think you actually brought to light some things that, you know, even myself found valuable. So I appreciate the time.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Likewise. Thank you very much for having me.
Well, thank you to all of you for a great discussion, and thank you to our audience for being here. We know that everybody's busy and it's hard to get to something in the middle of the day, and yet you found time to spend an hour with us. And so we appreciate that. And also thank you to Oligo for sponsoring this episode. And until next time, be well.
Thank you.